The gate slammed shut behind me before I even had time to turn around, and the sound of it locking echoed through the metal corridor like a warning. I stood there in the dim light, my heart pounding, staring at the four shapes waiting inside the room with me. None of them were human, none of them were friendly, and none of them expected me to still be breathing an hour later. My name is Grace Whitmore, and 3 days earlier I had been nothing more than a cargo pilot moving supply crates between mining stations. I had never held a weapon in my life. I had never even been in a real fight. But somehow, through a mix of bad luck and a border guard who did not like my attitude, I had ended up here, locked inside a containment cell built for creatures that were supposed to tear each other apart for entertainment. The guards outside the observation window were laughing. I could see them through the thick glass, arms crossed, waiting for the show to begin. One of them, a tall alien named Doran with gray skin and sharp eyes, tapped the glass and said something I could not hear, but I understood the meaning perfectly. He wanted me to be afraid. He wanted me to scream. He wanted this to be quick, so he could go back to his shift and forget about the strange human woman who mouthed off at the checkpoint. I was not going to give him that. The first creature to move was a massive beast with dark fur and horns curling from its skull. It was easily 3 times my size, chained loosely to the wall, though the chain looked more like decoration than restraint. It let out a low sound, somewhere between a growl and a question, testing the air around me. I did not step back. I did not run. Instead, I stood completely still and let it come closer, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off its body. Every instinct in me screamed to move, but I had learned something a long time ago, back when I was a kid dealing with bullies twice my size. Fear has a smell. Predators can sense it before you even know you are afraid. So instead of shaking, I forced my shoulders back and looked the creature straight in its eyes. It stopped less than a foot away from me and simply stared. Behind it, 2 smaller creatures with sharp teeth and quick movements circled slowly, watching how I would react. They looked like scavengers, patient and calculating, waiting for a weakness they could use. And in the far corner of the room, something else sat completely still, folded up like a discarded piece of cloth. I could not tell what it was. It did not move. It did not make a sound. But somehow, it felt like the most dangerous thing in the entire room. I sat down. Right there, in the middle of the cell, surrounded by 4 creatures that could have ended me in seconds. I sat down on the cold metal floor and pulled a ration bar from my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking, but I made sure my face did not show it. I opened the wrapper slowly, took a bite, and chewed like I had all the time in the world. The horned beast tilted its head, confused. It clearly expected me to run, to fight, to do anything except calmly eat a snack in front of it. The 2 scavengers stopped circling and exchanged a glance, as if trying to figure out what kind of trick this was. And the folded creature in the corner shifted, just slightly, unfurling an inch or 2, watching me with what I could only describe as curiosity. Outside the window, I heard laughter stop. I did not look up. I kept my eyes on my food, kept my breathing steady, and let the silence stretch on. Minutes passed, then an hour. The horned beast eventually lowered itself to the ground a few feet away from me, still watching, but no longer looming. The scavengers retreated to a corner, whispering to each other in a language I did not understand. And the folded creature crept a little closer, close enough that I could see it clearly for the first time. It had pale skin, almost translucent, with long limbs that bent in ways that made my stomach turn. But its eyes, when it finally lifted its head to look at me, were not filled with hunger. They were filled with something closer to loneliness. I finished my ration bar and set the wrapper down beside me. Then, very slowly, I extended my hand, palm up, the way you might offer a treat to a nervous animal. I had no idea if this would work. I had no idea if this creature even understood the gesture. But I was tired of being afraid, and something told me that fear was the only currency this place understood, and I had decided to stop paying it. The creature reached out with one long finger and touched my palm. It was cold, smoother than I expected, and it lingered there for a moment before pulling back. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. By the second hour, something had shifted in the room. The horned beast had moved close enough that its massive head rested near my shoulder, not threatening, almost protective. The 2 scavengers had stopped whispering and now sat quietly, watching the door instead of me, and the pale creature had unfolded completely, revealing a shape roughly my height, thin and strange, but no longer hiding in the corner. I understood, somewhere in the back of my mind, that I had not tamed these creatures. I had not fought them into submission. I had simply refused to be prey, and in refusing, I had become something else entirely in their eyes. Not a threat, not food, something closer to an equal, or perhaps even a leader. Outside the observation window, the guards were no longer laughing. Doran stood frozen, staring through the glass with wide eyes, his earlier confidence completely gone. Another guard, a shorter one named Petra, had her hand over her mouth, watching the scene unfold with something close to disbelief. I later learned that this cell was not just a random holding pen. It was part of a research program designed to study how different dangerous species reacted when forced together. Every previous attempt had ended the same way, with only one creature left standing, and a great deal of cleanup required afterward. Nobody had ever survived being placed inside without becoming part of that cleanup themselves, and certainly nobody had ever managed to calm the room entirely. The recording device in the corner of the ceiling had been running the entire time, feeding footage back to whoever oversaw this facility. I did not know that yet, but I would find out soon enough, because what happened next changed everything. 3 days passed. I do not remember all of it clearly, because time inside that cell seemed to move strangely, but I remember pieces. I remember sharing my rations with the horned beast, who I started calling Bram in my head, simply because he needed a name, and he seemed like a Bram. I remember the scavengers, who I never learned proper names for, eventually relaxing enough to sleep near the wall instead of watching me every second. And I remember the pale creature, who I decided to call Wren, staying close to me almost constantly, as if it had adopted me the same way a lost animal might adopt the first kind hand it found. None of them spoke my language. I did not speak theirs, but somehow, we understood each other well enough. A calm voice, a steady hand, the absence of fear. These things apparently translated across every species in that room, and by the third day, we had formed something that almost resembled a group, bound together not by force, but by the simple fact that none of us wanted to hurt each other anymore. When the time finally came for the guards to open the gate and remove me from the cell, I heard them arguing outside long before the door moved. Their voices were muffled through the metal, but I could tell something was wrong. The usual process, from what little I understood, involved simply walking in, restraining whichever creature was still alive, and removing them for processing. Nobody had ever needed a new plan before. The gate slid open only a few inches and stopped. I could see a sliver of the corridor beyond, and through the gap, Doran's face, pale and uncertain, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by something close to panic. "Come out slowly," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Just you. Come out slowly." I stood up. Bram rose beside me immediately, his massive body angling protectively between me and the door. The scavengers moved to flank my other side, and Wren stepped in front of all of them, standing tall for the first time since I had met it. "They think you are going to hurt me," I said, mostly to myself, though I somehow felt like the creatures around me understood the tone if not the words. "It is all right, let me go." I placed my hand on Bram's shoulder, feeling the tension in his massive frame slowly ease. I turned to Wren and gave a small nod, and though I could not read its expression clearly, something in its posture softened. The scavengers stepped back first, retreating toward the far wall, watching but no longer blocking my path. I walked toward the gate alone. The gap widened slightly as I approached, though I could tell the guards on the other side were ready to slam it shut again at the first sign of trouble. I stepped through slowly, keeping my hands visible, keeping my movements calm, the same way I had for the past 3 days. The moment I cleared the doorway, the gate slammed shut behind me with a heavy clang, sealing the creatures back inside. I turned to look through the observation window one last time, and I saw Bram standing near the door, watching me leave, no longer hostile, simply curious about where I was going. Wren remained close to the gate as well, its long fingers pressed against the glass from the inside. Doran stared at me like I had somehow rewritten the laws of nature. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a scanner device, running it over me as if checking for some kind of hidden weapon or trick. Petra stood a few steps back, watching the whole exchange with wide eyes, saying nothing. 3 cycles, Doran muttered, mostly to himself. 3 cycles, and we have never had anyone come out of that cell without a fight. What did you do in there? I shrugged, brushing a bit of dust off my jacket. I did not do anything, I told him honestly. I just stopped being afraid of them, and they stopped seeing me as something to fear. He did not seem to understand the answer, but he did not push further either. He simply escorted me down the corridor, glancing back over his shoulder at the cell more than once, as if expecting the creatures inside to break free at any moment. They did not. I was taken to a processing room, where a supervisor reviewed my file, muttering something about a clerical error regarding my detention in the first place. Apparently, the entire situation had been the result of a misunderstanding at the checkpoint, compounded by my own stubborn refusal to apologize for something I had not done wrong. The supervisor, an older alien named Corvin, looked at me with a strange mixture of respect and confusion as he stamped my release papers. You do understand what just happened, he said, sliding the papers across the desk toward me. That cell has been used for over 30 containment tests. Every single one ended with casualties. You are the first person, human or otherwise, to walk out without a mark on you. I did not have a good answer for him, so I simply took my papers and thanked him for his time. As I walked through the station toward the docking bay where my ship waited, I noticed people staring. Word apparently traveled fast in a place like this, and by the time I reached my ship, a small crowd had gathered near the security checkpoint, whispering among themselves. I heard fragments of conversation as I passed, questions about how a human with no weapons and no training had managed to calm 4 of the most dangerous creatures in the sector. I did not stop to explain. I simply boarded my ship, sat down in the pilot's chair, and allowed myself to finally breathe. It took me nearly an hour before my hands stopped shaking. I sat there in the quiet cockpit, staring out at the stars beyond the station, thinking about Bram, about Ren, about the 2 scavengers who had never trusted me, but had never attacked me either. I thought about how close I had come to a very different outcome, and how strange it was that the thing that saved me was not strength or skill, but simply the decision to stop being afraid. 6 months later, I found myself passing through Corvo Station again, this time on a routine supply run. I had almost forgotten about the incident, though the memory still surfaced occasionally in quiet moments, usually late at night when sleep would not come easily. Out of curiosity, I decided to walk past the containment wing during a layover, mostly to see if anything had changed. The corridor looked the same as before, cold metal walls and dim lighting, though a new sign had been placed near the observation window, something that had not been there during my previous visit. I stopped to read it. "Do not assume calm means unarmed," it said, printed in bold letters beneath a warning symbol. I could not help but smile at that. It seemed like fitting advice, especially considering what I had learned in that cell. Calm was not weakness. It was a choice, and sometimes it was the most powerful choice available. I never went back to Pen 7 itself, and I never found out what became of Bram, Ren, or the 2 scavengers I had shared those 3 days with. Part of me hoped they had been released, given a second chance somewhere far from that station. Another part of me suspected they remained exactly where they were, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to be thrown into their world. Either way, I carried the lesson with me long after leaving that station behind. Fear, I had learned, was not something other species understood the same way humans did. Where other creatures froze or fled or postured when threatened, humans seemed to have a strange ability to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly even when every instinct screamed to panic. It was not a superpower. It was not some special strength written into our biology. It was simply a choice, one that most of us never had to make in our entire lives, but one that apparently mattered a great deal when it counted most. I think about that day often, especially when new pilots ask me for advice about dealing with dangerous situations out in the void. I never tell them the full story, mostly because it sounds unbelievable even to me, and I lived through it. Instead, I tell them something simpler, something that captures the heart of what I learned inside that cell. Stay calm, I tell them. No matter what happens, no matter how frightening the situation seems, stay calm. Creatures react to fear, they react to panic, but calm confuses them, and confusion buys you time, and time is sometimes all you need to survive. Most of them nod politely and forget the advice within a week, assuming it is just something older pilots say to sound wise. I do not blame them. I would have thought the same thing before that day in Pen 7, but every so often, I hear back from one of them, usually months later, thanking me for the advice after some close call-out in a distant sector, a moment where staying calm made all the difference between walking away and not walking away at all. Those messages always bring a small smile to my face, and they remind me of Bram's massive shoulder pressed against mine, of Ren's cold fingers touching my palm for the first time, of 2 scavengers who never trusted me but never harmed me either. I do not know if I will ever end up in a situation like that again. I certainly hope not, if I am being honest. But if I do, I know exactly what I will do. I will sit down, I will breathe, and I will refuse to be afraid, no matter what stands in front of me. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do in the face of danger is simply choose not to run. And sometimes, that choice is enough to change everything.